in a good term. And it seems to go back to this idea of the feminine wisdom, the idea that just what you talked about in the book of Judges. We seem to continue our misogyny by downgrading the feminine wisdom element. And so maybe you can pull a few of those threads together as a good place to, kind of tie up this in.
Well, it is my opinion, and I base this only on Jung's work and other psychologists. And I know that your listeners and your viewers might go, well, you can't mix psychology and religion. But let me tell you something. Religion reflects the psychology of the masses at the time. And that's why we're having trouble, because...
Forget, too, that Carl Jung was a Christian mystic, and his mother was a Christian mystic as well.
Yes.
Very powerful woman.
So I believe wholeheartedly that the elimination of the wisdom, spirit, glory, comforter, female face of our God, the elimination of those things has given rise, because of the innate need of humans to have this nurturing mother balance, has given rise to the proliferation of goddess worship, of some forms of Wiccan worship, to the revival worldwide of Gnosticism, because we have failed to have the balance. An imbalanced theology leads to an imbalanced psyche, and an imbalanced psyche always leads to the quest to fill that void in some way. And that is why the Catholic Church has slowly elevated Mary into a goddess position, although I may get hate letters about that, but let's just say, instead of saying goddess position, let's say the female face. She represents the female face of God now in heaven, because we have neglected to say to our followers as ministers, God has a female form. It is wisdom, it is grace, it is Shekinah, it is Ruach, it is Sophia. And I don't mean Sophia as a goddess personage. I mean, if you can envision a corpus of wisdom, that is Sophia. Now, Gnosticism did this by creating a personage of Sophia. And in their cosmology, in their creation story, man was made by a group of angels, but he was only a worm that could not bring him to humanity. And Sophia came down and enlivened him through her spirit, which is the Spirit of God. And Adam said, "Who calls to me out of this darkness? Who gives me hope in this rancid cage?" And Sophia spoke to him in those scriptures, and she said, "It is I, the perfect Spirit of God." You might not be a Gnostic, but somewhere in your heart, that made sense. The problem is we had that, you see. That is in Genesis. It is articulated slightly differently, but it's there in all of its glory, and we have gotten so far away from it, linguistically and socially, that we have nullified it, and people are now seeking it again.
One final thing, and this came to mind as you were talking as well, because again, I'm coming at this from a perspective where I understand my audience well enough and my own background, which was in evangelical Christianity. I've seen the phenomena over, I guess, going back to the late 1980s and onward, of the interest in Jezebel. And clearly there's something to this, because you have Jezebel in the Old Testament, and then she's revisited again in the book of Revelation at a kind of a type and shadow. So I guess my question is, in your view, is Jezebel sort of the warning of what happens when we fall out of balance? Because the picture that I always get from the stories is it is a distortion of both the male and the feminine.
It is a role reversal, yes, and I think it is a story of balance. I've heard a lot of Baptist preachers in my time preach that Jezebel's problem was that she was putting on makeup, and that's and that's why she fell out of the window. If you remember the story, her husband had turned his face to the wall and was pouting because he didn't own a small plot of land around the castle that belonged to somebody else. And he approached him and he said, well, that man said, I can't give up my inheritance and it's against the rules to do so. So why are you asking me? And Jezebel said, well, we'll do it my way. And the man was murdered and everything was taken. I have seen a lot of women have hands laid on them to remove the spirit of Jezebel. I really think that that's a very blasphemous thing to do. It dehumanizes the woman. It degrades her. And it's usually a man who's doing that because that man probably has a problem with that woman sexually. He's probably thinking to himself, she's sexy, so I need to remove the sexuality from her so that I'm not tempted. Remembering that a long time ago, the Catholic Church called women occasions of sin because it was their fault that we were drawn to them. Again, it is an imbalance. And humans, the real problem with humanity in general is that we really cannot maintain balance. We are all over the road. We are to the left, to the right. We're very, very seldom in the center, in the balance. So I so absolutely agree with you that the story of Jezebel is nothing more than what can go desperately wrong if you go too far in the other direction. Let's say that you have a religion with that is a goddess religion completely dominating men. That would be the other side of this coin. We don't need to go there. Nor do we need to be in a completely male-dominated society or religion, which we have been for the last couple of thousand years, for the last 1,000 years anyway. In the last 1,000 years, in 1100, they forbade the marriage of the priests.
And we see what that's wrought. It's just been brutal. All kinds of sexual things that have come out of that, and we've seen it in recent years. And by no means does the Catholic Church own the franchise on that, but again, you've got the same issues that crop up.
Well, again, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but who cares? I'm in trouble all the time anyway with the books I write.
This is a great place to do it. I'm in trouble constantly.
I get hate mail. And by the way, I'm sorry, your viewers, the sun has gone down in Alabama, and I know that I'm getting some shadows here, but please don't write Randy, it's my fault. The lighting has gone away slowly as I've talked. So if you repress one major urge, that is sex, that urge will pop up either in another place or it will pop up converted, diverted, and perverted in the place that the real issue had been suppressed. So that's the problem with the priesthood. But at the same time, I don't know of a lot of pastors in general in churches around here, the Baptist and Methodist churches and assemblies and churches of God that aren't, fat. Because if you suppress one thing, you're going to indulge in another. And it's a real problem. They either pamper themselves too much. There's a group of them around this area that get their hair permed every week or two. And they drive around in their Mercedes and they wear their silk, suits and all of that stuff. And they think of themselves more highly than they ought. And you have and you have very, very obese pastors running around who have tried to be good and stay away from the sisters, and they eat themselves to death trying to do that because they're coping. It's the psychology of the thing. But I digress.
No, actually, it's not a digression. It's commentary, and it's an observation. But it all goes to the same place in that we have distortions in our faith. As a result of that, we have distortions in our spiritual relationships.
The sad thing is, Randy, that part of this distortion is actually monetarily driven. And you go, what? But look, in 1100, when they did this, the Catholic Church did this, what was actually happening is that, for the most part, families would put one child in the priesthood. One son went to the priesthood. One son went to control the family, to rule, you might say. And exactly. Well, if you forbid the child to marry, who is usually the second son, the inheritance is split. Some of the inheritance goes to the second son. The second son has no descendants. The money goes directly into the coffers of the church when that son dies, because he inherits and then he dies. The Catholic Church became amazingly rich, because if you follow the money, you get rid of the sex, you tax them for having children, you eventually forbid them to marry, and all of a sudden you have the inheritance of that family through the second son coming into the church, filling up the coffers. And now we have a problem because we have no balance, because men are made, for the most part, and women are made to eat and drink and breathe and be loved. We all seek to have love. We seek to be the lover and the beloved, and we need that. And, Paul himself said, there are only a few people who can do this, and if you can do it, that's fine. But if you can't, it's really better to marry than to burn.
So we lose the balance when we go too far. Joseph, hey, there's not enough time, and it's always so interesting. It's refreshing because you're open with your scholarship, your opinions, your thoughts, and your emotions, and I really appreciate that. So you have a book that is presently in editing on this subject.
Yes, I believe it will be called The Sacred Feminine, Searching for the Female Face of God. And it should be out in about 2 months. It is in editing process right now. Covers a lot of the things that we've discussed here today.
So we'll run some links and things over to Fifth Estate Publishing, and I thank you so much for coming on again. I'm certain we'll talk some more as this book comes forward, and over some other things that I think are also common interests as well. This has been The Threshing Floor. I'm Randy Moggins. Conversation with Dr. Joseph Lumpkin, The Sacred Feminine, and we'll look for your comments.